On May 9th, 2026, Vladimir Putin stood on Red Square and watched his Victory Day parade. But before a single soldier marched, he needed a favor. And not from a general or an ally, from Donald Trump. According to the investigative outlet iStories, Putin asked the American president to persuade Zelensky not to strike Moscow during the celebrations. Now just sit with that for a second. The self-styled heir to the czars asking his enemies for permission to hold his own parade. I mean, when I read that line, I knew exactly what video we had to make. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Domino Effect, the channel where we map the wars, the weapons, and the power struggles shaping our world one falling domino at a time. Today, as you've probably guessed, we're going inside the Kremlin because Russia's Game of Thrones has already begun. The clans, the private armies, the fortunes changing hands. The knives are coming out, folks, and by the end of this video, you're going to know every player on the board. And more importantly, you'll know exactly what to watch for when this thing finally blows up. So let's get into it. All right, first, a quick piece of homework. And don't worry, I promise it's short, but it's the key to everything that follows. A monarchy survives its king because everyone knows who comes next. There's a crown prince, the succession line is written down, and the elite have no reason to gamble. Putin's Russia is the exact opposite. 25 years in power, and there's no designated heir, no ruling party with real authority, no institution strong enough to referee a handover. Power in Russia flows through personal relationships, like who served with Putin in St. Petersburg, who guarded his body, who might owe him a fortune. The entire system is one man's address book, and here's the problem. To the best of my knowledge, you cannot bequeath an address book. His family? There's no escape hatch there either. The adult daughters stay far from politics. The reported sons with Alina Kabayeva are children, and unlike the czars he loves to channel, Putin has no divine right to hand down. Whatever loyalty attaches to him personally dies with him. Even the Soviet Union, for all of its horrors, kept a Politburo that would crown the next general secretary. Putin demolished every structure like that, and honestly, from his chair, it was the logical move. Any institution strong enough to pick his successor is strong enough to pick his replacement. Analysts at the Carnegie Endowment put it brutally in June 2026. Russia's elite isn't a political class anymore, just a community of managers waiting for instructions. So what happens when the instructions stop coming? Nobody in the building is authorized to decide. Which means when the rules can't choose the next czar, something else will. And in Russia, that something has always worn a uniform. So let's open the file, starting with the first army in this war. And no, it was never built to fight Ukraine. On May 29th, 2026, iStories and the German outlet Correctiv published an investigation titled, literally, The Mapping of Power, Russia's Game of Thrones, a full profile of the clans positioning themselves for the fight over Putin's throne. And the first clan in the file is the one Putin trusts most, his bodyguards. Their boss is Viktor Zolotov, 72 years old, guarding Putin since the St. Petersburg days. A man whose nickname in the city's criminal circles, according to the investigation, was the Pierced, earned for his cruelty and his total loyalty. Sounds like a lovely guy. 35 years, one mission. Keep one man on the throne. So, what does this loyal bodyguard command? The Rosgvardia, Russia's National Guard, roughly 350,000 troops, carved out of the Interior Ministry in 2016 and kept outside the regular army's chain of command. And after Prigozhin's mercenaries marched on Moscow in June 2023, Putin signed a decree handing this force heavy armor. Now stop and think about what that actually means. 350,000 troops, tanks, and not one mission on the front line in Ukraine. Because this army points inward at Russia itself. It exists for exactly one scenario, the day the throne shakes. But firepower isn't even the clan's best card. Position is. Meet Alexey Dyumin, 53, 15 years at Putin's side, day and night. And I mean that literally. Per the investigation, this is the man who kept Putin from drowning in the ocean and guarded him from bears in the taiga. I am not making that up. Dyumin rose to deputy head of the GRU, commanding the Special Operations Forces during the seizure of Crimea. Then spent 8 years governing Tula while ministries and state companies tripped over each other to make the president's favorite look good. In May of 2024, Putin brought him home, a presidential aide overseeing the defense industry, and secretary of the State Council. Now pay attention to that last title, because that once decorative body was written into the Constitution in 2020, and many experts read it the same way: a pre-built mechanism for handing power to a successor while keeping a grip on the successor's decisions. And I'll be honest with you, of every name in this file, Dyumin is the one I'd watch first. Putin didn't give him an army, he gave him something better: the exit mechanism. And the clan runs deeper. Dmitry Kochnev, a veteran of the KGB directorate that guarded Soviet leaders, has run the Federal Protective Service since 2016. He's wired into the Kremlin itself, with constant access to Putin and files on everyone. Alexey Rubeznoy, chief of the president's personnel security detail, has been converting proximity into property. Per the investigation, he lobbied for the decree that stripped Russia's largest car dealer from its owners and steered it towards his own relative. Nice work if you can get it. And then there's my favorite detail in the entire file: Dmitry Mironov, a former adjutant Putin reportedly calls Sonny. And yes, that is exactly as Godfather as it sounds. Mironov chairs the Kremlin Commission on Personal Policy in the law enforcement agencies. Every dossier on every senior security official in the country crosses his desk. In this game, folks, that's not paperwork, that's ammunition. So that's the muscle. Now, let's meet the brains and the wallet, because the most dangerous clan in Russia doesn't carry guns at all. The investigation calls them the Consiglieri, and the name fits: Yuri Kovalchuk, 74, Putin's personal banker and his chief ideologue. This is the man who, according to multiple sources, spent more time with the isolated president during the pandemic than almost anyone, feeding him the worldview of restored historical greatness and eternal war with the West. So when you ask, who put these ideas in Putin's head? That's your leading suspect. The clan's vault is Bank Rossiya and the Sogaz Insurance Group. Its megaphone is the National Media Group, chaired, by the way, by Alina Kabayeva. They control Channel 1, Fifth Channel, Ren TV, and Izvestia. Its political machine is Sergei Kiriyenko, the Kremlin's curator of internal policy and the man who picks governors and manufactures election results. His son runs VK, Russia's biggest social network. His brother Mikhail runs the Kurchatov Institute's scientific empire. Their man Byeglov governs St. Petersburg. Money, media, science, ideology, and the machinery of politics. One family. If this were a board game, you would accuse them of cheating. And then they made the two moves that turned a powerful family into a potential kingmaker. In 2024, Yuri's son Boris took over the accounts chamber. That gives the state's chief auditor the power to inspect any official's finances. And in September 2025, Alexander Gutsin, described in the investigation as the clan's man in the legal system, became Prosecutor General of Russia. Now, study that pairing for a second, because it's beautiful in the darkest possible way. One office finds the corruption. The other decides whose corruption counts. In a country where every great fortune began with a favor, that's a loaded weapon you can point at literally anyone. And think about how that plays out in practice. Some rival gets ambitious and suddenly the auditors find irregularities and the prosecutors find them very interesting. Heck of a coincidence, isn't it? No shots fired, career over, assets gone. That is the Kovalchuk way of war. Guns on one side, money and prosecutors on the other. And the referee between them has always been the secret police. Just one small problem. By spring 2026, the secret police were busy investigating each other. Now here's where it gets genuinely wild. On May 4th, 2026, iStories, the Financial Times, and CNN published details of an intelligence report describing senior Russian security officials increasingly blaming one another for the failures in Ukraine. And oh, are there failures to distribute. By iStory's accounting, the Russian army has been losing more than 35,000 soldiers a month while barely moving the map. Independent assessments put the June 2026 toll at roughly 39,500 casualties across about 12 square miles of ground. 12. Behind the front, every dial is in the red at once. A widening budget deficit, regional finances sinking, businesses choking on sky-high interest rates, inflation just grinding families down. And in the middle of it, the state is strangling its own internet. The Economist called the situation a possible turning point in the war. And Sir Lawrence Freedman, one of Britain's best-known military scholars, told the magazine that this moment increasingly looks like exactly that. Somebody has to answer for a picture like this. And inside the Lubyanka, the hunt for somebody has turned inward. And get this, Alexander Bortnikov, running the FSB since 2008, is fading. iStory's sources say the 74-year-old spends more time in sanatoriums than at his desk. The man whose job is watching everyone is barely at work. His first deputy, Sergei Korolev, who insiders call the Gray Cardinal, runs the Lubyanka day to day. Nicholas Patrushev, who spent 16 years turning the Security Council into a shadow government, was shunted into shipbuilding in May 2024. From shadow ruler of Russia to boats. But don't cry for him. His network still runs deep, including Alexey Sadov, chief of the FSB directorate that human rights groups call the political Gestapo, whose officers, according to the investigation, were behind the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. And then, in early May 2026, Western media reported that plans for Putin's removal were allegedly taking shape within the ruling elite. Now, treat that word allegedly with respect because it's doing the heavy lifting here. But you need to understand why it matters at all. In a system where a wrong word can end your career or even your life, the mere existence of that reporting and of security chiefs documented blaming each other tells you the fear that froze this elite solid for 2 decades is starting to thaw. Now I know what exactly half of you are typing in the comments already. The army decides. Hold that thought, because Putin thought of it too, about 20 years before you did. And what he did to his own military is the single most revealing move on this entire board. Look at the military clan in the file and tell me this isn't deliberate. The Minister of Defense since May 2024 is not a general. Andrey Belousov is an economist. His doctrine is what he calls military Keynesianism, colossal war spending as the engine of the whole economy. And his actual mission is to audit the army, hunting the corruption that hollowed it out before 2022. The investigation calls him an ideal instrument for Putin to control the security bloc. And here's the translation. The generals cannot love this man, and therefore they cannot follow him into rebellion. Putin didn't appoint a warrior. He appointed a calculator with security clearance. Actual command runs through Valery Gerasimov, 70, chief of the general staff since 2012, and one of 3 men with access to the nuclear briefcase. He's been personally running the war since January 2023, and the dirty work belongs to Igor Koistyukov's GRU. Sabotage, cyber attacks, and lately, real political weight, with Koistyukov himself leading Russia's delegation at talks in Abu Dhabi in January 2026. So, an accountant holds the money, an aging commander holds the front, a spy master holds the knife, and no single figure can rally the army behind a bid for the throne. It's the same trick the Tsars pulled with rival guard regiments, the same trick Stalin pulled with competing security agencies. Never let one man hold both the loyalty and the weapons. Say what you want about Putin, the man knows how to coup-proof a country. He's had practice watching it done to others. Now notice who's missing from this file entirely. The Prime Minister, the head of the central bank, the finance minister. The investigators left Russia's famous technocrats out on purpose. But why? Well, because none of them, in their assessment, controls anything that shoots. Now let that sink in for a second, because it's a lesson about the whole system. In a normal country, the people who run the economy are the people who matter. In Putin's Russia, competence without coercion is just staff. When this board finally moves, the spreadsheet guys will be working for whichever clan wins, not competing with them. So, with force off the table, for now, the first battles of this war aren't being fought over the throne at all. They're being fought over property. And folks, they have already started. Here's what the opening phase of a succession war actually looks like. Spoiler alert, no swords. Vadim Mashkovich built Rosgvardia into one of Russia's agricultural giants. The state took it. Dmitry Kamenchik owned Domodedovo, one of Moscow's main airports. The state took it. Konstantin Strukov controlled Zolotov, one of the country's biggest gold producers. The state took that too. Analysts at the New Eurasian Strategy Center list them among the wealthiest casualties of an asset seizure wave that ripped through 2025 and 2026. Pressure on big business they flat out call unprecedented, driven by an emboldened FSB. And Poland's OSW Center reads the same wave as something darker than greed. The economy is shrinking. So the elite is now carving up a smaller pie, in open violation of the old rules of the game. And only the strongest players can still consider their property safe. Translation, your assets in Russia are now worth exactly as much as your clan's position in the coming fight. Real quick, if you're enjoying this breakdown, do us a favor and subscribe to the Domino Effect. We make the power maps behind the headlines. Who really holds the guns, the money, and the files? And you're going to want to stay for the next part, I promise, because the hungriest players in the fight are about to walk on stage. Igor Sechin, the Rosneft boss whose own colleagues nicknamed him Darth Vader, which should tell you everything you need to know, he draws his muscle from the FSB internal security unit he helped build for the Yukos case, a unit so feared it's called Sechin's Spetsnaz. Its former commander, Ivan Kachov, now heads the FSB's military counterintelligence department, which is the body that watches the Ministry of Defense and its colossal wartime budgets. Read that again. The oil clan's man now audits the army's money. The old KGB crowd is feeding at the same table. Sergei Chemezov, Putin's comrade from Dresden, runs Rostech's hundreds of defense plants. And per the investigation, assets of owners deemed disloyal keep getting transferred into Rostech's hands. His protege, Manturov, sits as first deputy prime minister. Putin pinned the Hero of Russia star on him in 2026 for keeping the front supplied. The Rodenbergs, Putin's childhood friends, have absorbed at least 3 nationalized firms through a linked company, according to the Financial Times. Timchenko's people run the shadow tanker fleet, keeping sanctioned oil money flowing east. Even the bodyguards are at the table. Remember Rubeznoy and that car dealership empire? Every clan in this video is converting position into property, while the converting is still good. All right, you were promised a Game of Thrones. This is what its opening battles look like. No blood on the carpet, just billionaires walking out of buildings they used to own. The knives are definitely out. They're just shaped like court orders. But some players never bothered waiting for court orders. Konstantin Malofeyev, who the Russian media calls the Orthodox oligarch, helped bankroll the armed units that tore into Ukraine's Donbas back in 2014. And since 2022, he's financed a whole constellation of volunteer battalions and private armed formations. The iStories investigation describes him, in its own words, as a possible jack-in-the-box in the 2026 struggle for succession. His circle includes the former KGB foreign intelligence officer serving as presidential envoy over central Russia and Metropolitan Tikhon, the churchman widely described as Putin's personal confessor. So, private money, private guns, and a direct line to God. What could possibly go wrong? And remember, Russia has already watched one private army march on Moscow. The men financing the next ones took very careful notes about how far Prigozhin got, about how few people tried to stop him on that highway, and about the plane that fell out of the sky 2 months later with him on board. That's the Prigozhin lesson, and everyone in Moscow learned a different half of it. The ambitious learned how fragile the state looked that day. The state learned to hand Zolotov tanks. Meanwhile, a quieter battle has broken out over the political machine itself. According to the New Eurasian Strategies Center, the run-up to the September 2026 parliamentary elections has become a straight-up power struggle between Kirilenko's Kremlin bloc and the FSB. And the security men are winning. Yes, I can hear you. Elections in Russia, but stay with me, because even rigged elections are a real fight. A fight over who gets to do the rigging, whose people fill the seats, and who controls the machinery of legitimacy on the day it suddenly matters. In a succession crisis, the man who runs the fake democracy gets to crown the real winner. The near-total blocking of Telegram, a platform with 95 million Russian users, and rolling mobile internet shutdowns across Moscow and St. Petersburg have enraged business and split the elite, with the government's own economists warning of the damage. And the crackdown is now eating the very people who once served the regime. On July 17, 2026, police detained Ilya Remezlo, a former pro-Kremlin blogger who turned on Putin and called for his resignation. The same week, a court convicted the anti-war politician Boris Nadezhdin and barred him from the September ballot. When a regime starts jailing its own former loyalists, that's not strength. That's a system checking every lock twice because it no longer trusts the people holding the keys. Which brings us finally to the man at the center of the board. And here's the thing you have to understand about Putin's position. He sees all of this more clearly than anyone. He built it. So why doesn't he just name a successor and settle it? Because he can't. The moment he points at an error, every clan in this video starts quietly shifting loyalty toward the future. And the 73-year-old on the throne becomes a lame duck while still sitting on it. Naming an heir wouldn't end the Game of Thrones. It would fire the starting gun. So instead, his succession plan, as far as anyone outside the Kremlin can tell, is medical. Don't have a succession. Reporting from July 19, 2026, described Putin's deepening obsession with longevity, state-funded projects on gene therapy and organ replacement. And look, I know how that sounds, medieval fantasy in a lab coat, but history has already seen this movie. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, conquered every rival, built an empire around his own person, then spent his final years drinking supposed elixirs of immortality, laced with mercury that likely helped kill him at 49. His empire tore itself apart within a few years of his death. 22 centuries later, a ruler in the same trap is reaching for gene therapy instead of mercury. The tools change, the trap doesn't. And inside this system, it's all perfectly rational, because every man at the top shares one overriding interest with his czar: delay the reckoning. The bodyguards keep their armor, the Kovalchuks keep their bank, Sechin keeps his oil, and the czar keeps breathing. That's the entire social contract of late Putinism written in one sentence. Now I want to pump the brakes a bit here, on you and honestly on myself. Predicting the regime's collapse has been a losing bet for 25 years, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just because it makes a better thumbnail. The analysts at Poland's OSW Center assessing these exact tensions on May 18, 2026 were blunt. Signs of systemic erosion are mounting, but there's insufficient evidence that a crisis of power or an elite revolt is imminent. And they explain the paradox. Moving against Putin carries enormous risk, and the chaos any transition would unleash could wreck a system already strained by war. So the safest move for every clan is to keep preparing while changing nothing. Hear what that actually is, though. That's not loyalty. That's a standoff. Both things are true at once. The fight is real, documented, and already running, but the ending is not scheduled. Autocracies look immortal right up until the afternoon that they aren't. So, if the revolt isn't scheduled, what would tell us the endgame has actually started? This is the part of the video I actually care about most, because headlines will scream at you every week from here on out, and most of them will mean nothing. Write these down, because this is the frame I want you to keep long after this video ends. In a personalist system, don't watch the front line. Watch the palace. 5 signals. 1. The Rosgvardia, where Zolotov's 350,000 troops and their armor sit, and who they obey, matters more than any battle in Ukraine. A force built to control Moscow decides who controls Russia. 2. The purges. When indictments start flowing from Gustan's prosecutors and reshuffles start flowing through Miranov's personnel commission, that's not housekeeping. In this system, an indictment is an opening shot. 3. The September 2026 elections, a live stress test of the war between Kiriyenko's machine and the FSB, fought over who holds the levers the day after Putin. 4. The State Council. If that body's role suddenly expands, the pre-built transfer mechanism is being switched on, and you'd better watch whose hand is on that switch. And 5. The Tsar's calendar. In a system built around one man, the leader's schedule is a vital sign. And every clan in this video reads Putin's public appearances the way doctors read a heart monitor. When the appearances thin out, the knives come out. Which means the question was never when Russia's succession war starts. It started, quietly, while the world was watching the front line. The only question left is when it stops being quiet. Remember that favor from the start of this video? On May 9th, the most powerful man in Russia reportedly had to ask his enemies whether it was safe to stand on his own reviewing platform. That's the whole story in a single image. The decisive variable in Russia's future isn't NATO. It isn't the front line. It isn't the price of oil. It's the authority of one man, the single load-bearing wall holding up the entire structure. Now, nothing we showed you proves that the wall is about to give. What it proves, though, is more unsettling. Every serious player in Moscow is preparing for the day it does. Arming, auditing, prosecuting, positioning, all while publicly swearing loyalty to the Tsar. Every empire built on one man ends the same way. Not when the man falls, but when the men around him start planning for the day he will. In Russia, that planning is no longer a secret. And it changes the war, too. A leadership watching its own palace fights differently than one that fears nothing behind its back. More cautions abroad, more brutal at home. So now you tell me, if Putin vanished from the board, who wins the first 48 hours? The man with 350,000 armed guards, or the family with the money, the media, and the prosecutors? Drop your read in the comments. I genuinely read them and I'd love to hear from you. Hit like if this map made the chaos make sense. Subscribe if you want to see the next move coming before the headlines do. I'll see you when the next domino falls.